Hello, Cheryl, by the way.
Oh, hi. Good to see you.
Uh-oh. I am so sorry. The second we go live, that's when my phone rings.
You could have left it in the car, Sarah.
What is that?
You should have just left it in the car.
My phone? That would have been a good
Yes.
idea. Okay, I'm just going to ring it. Well, good evening and welcome to our South Coast Interfaith family and friends and everyone else out there and who's joining us, whether it's on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, or if you're catching this recording later. We're here today as we're here as part of our 1 week of Long Beach Gives, which is an annual day of giving for nonprofits in the city of Long Beach. The official day of giving is on Thursday, but throughout the week, the Interfaith Council is creating these opportunities to connect and reach out to our constituents, our members, our surrounding communities, so everyone has an opportunity to hear a little bit about our work and all the people that are involved in the council. So today we are specifically gathered here to explore a conversation that's really near and dear to my heart and where I find myself nearly every day. And that is the idea of finding common ground in a divisive world, operating from a faith-based perspective. And we're going to unpack, that was a lot of words, and we're going to unpack that a little bit more in the next hour. First, I want to make sure to thank our wonderful office administrator who is hosting this Zoom and managing the Zoom. Thank you, Cheryl, so much for putting together taking care of all the logistics for us so that we could just concentrate on having a really fun conversation. Thank you.
No problem. Happy to help.
Yes. And Milia, well, I think our wonderful and incredible executive director, she had a family circumstance arise, so she will try to join us a little bit later. But I am very excited today to introduce everyone to three really incredible people who I'm so grateful to have the privilege of working with because they help me see things from a different perspective quite often. As I alluded to earlier, all of us here are here today because we find ourselves at this intersection, this precarious intersection of politics, civic engagement, and the expression of our faith. So first up, we have Jane Afonso. Jane is the chair of the South Coast Interfaith Council's Justice and Peace Committee. She is also a leader and organizer in local fair trade movements and in climate movements. Honestly, if I listed all of Jane's activism and leadership positions, we would be here for 30 minutes. I will just say that if there is something important that needs to be said in terms of justice and equity, Jane is smack dab to be found in the middle of it. And so we are so grateful to have her voice, her energy, and her activism leading the Justice and Peace Committee. We also have with us here today, Marietta Fong from, and I forgot to mention, Jane is a member of the First Lutheran Church. And we have Marietta here, who is from Rolling Hills United Methodist Church. And she also works with the Toberman Neighborhood Center to support the most vulnerable in our cities. And what brings her into this conversation is the extensive work she's done in depolarizing conversations, and I call it depolarization work through an organization called Braver Angels. And I am guessing she is going to allude to it later on in the conversation as well. So I'm so grateful to have Marietta here because she's developed a really good skill set in finding ways to go back to civil discourse, even when the stakes are high and the disagreements seem untenable. Lastly, we have one of our past South Coast Interfaith Council presidents with us today, Jim Greer from the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints in the East Long Beach stake, from the East Long Beach stake, I should say. And Milia and I have missed him so much over the last 2 years since he ended his term. We're always trying to find ways to rope him back into the council. So I'm so grateful that he's able to join us today. He is serving right now as VP of Leisure World's Interfaith Council, so providing assistance to the elderly community there in supporting their faith practice and developing interfaith relationships. And most recently, Jim was supporting the LGBTQ community and allies within the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints. So thank you all for being here today. And I'm just looking at our agenda. That was a part. Okay, so we're going to go into doing a little bit of framing. So again, situating this conversation, talking about what brings us, why did we think it was so important to have this conversation? So I want to point out today that we are not attempting to offer a solution to any of the great divisions in our nation and communities today. And secondly, we acknowledge that some very important and needed voices are not present today. This panel, nor the SCIC board, are representative of every valid and significant perspective nor identity group in our country. And as a council, as we promote pluralism in our cities and nation, we are also a work in progress. We continue this work internally as well. And as usual, we invite feedback, suggestions, and ideas from the South Bay, LA, and Long Beach communities on how we can better fulfill our mission and vision. So today we are here simply to share our stories as people who found themselves in the SCIC community, seemingly with some shared values and some similar and shared concerns, yet coming from different personal narratives, different faith lifestyles, and more. And as we all worked with each other over the last few years, we started to be curious about what could it be that has led us all into the interfaith space, and why do we remain engaged? What promise or hope do we see in interfaith engagement in today's world? So keeping in mind those limitations and the possibilities, I'm going to invite our wonderful guests today to share their stories. So I'm going to remind you of the prompt. If you guys can each, and we'll start, this is not the order is completely arbitrary. We'll go Jane, Marietta, and Jim. And if you can both take, 2 to 3 minutes sharing what brought you into the interfaith space and what keeps you here, and how does your faith pull you into civic engagement or social justice movements? And go ahead, Jane, if you could get us started.
So I guess the bigger question for me is what brought me back into a faith life at all. That was the real big step. And my piano ended up at a church, and I found some people that seemed to be actually living out what they professed. There seemed to be minimal hypocrisy, and they were doing social justice work. And when I got involved with them, they were involved with Interfaith. So as a national church, as a regional church, and as in my local church. So I also, from a spiritual standpoint, it was actually easier for me to grab hold of my faith when I heard people sharing about their faith, and it deepened my faith. So that's.
And Jane, the second part, how does your faith relate to your social justice work? How does it animate your fight for justice and equity?
Right. So it's, I was interested in social justice before I found my way back to church, and I mostly came from a place of anger, and I was not very effective. And it's amazing how when my activism became grounded in love and acceptance and forgiveness and gratitude, it just changed everything.
Oh, that is absolutely lovely. And we're going to have to come back to this idea of operating from a place of love, while remembering that it is important sometimes to dismantle certain things. Thank you so much, Jane. Marietta, we'd love to hear your story.
Well, I was raised in the Christian home, and I was drawn to the United Methodist congregation simply because I love their message, especially their focus on justice, service, and inclusion. And so as I've grown in that faith and been active in that church, I just looked for opportunities to serve in the community. And as far as the interfaith connection, it was really in response to an atmosphere of what I felt, and many of us felt, was an increasing intolerance. And over the past several years, looking for a way to overcome that, to enhance the connections between faiths, between people of different perspectives. And I found just a great blessing in a women's prayer group, which led me then to the South Coast Interfaith Council. And that's just been really marvelous spot to be. And I stay there partly because of the friendships that are so deep and so meaningful and develop so organically and spontaneously and sincerely from the people who are involved in the council, and the opportunity to learn so much more about other faiths, other traditions, and people who live those faiths and who hold them dear and are very passionate about them, and to contribute to really meaningful work in the community, hand in hand with other people on the council and in other interfaith. That, of course, one thing leads to another, right? So you're working with the council, and then you meet people who are involved and engaged in something else, and then you learn about that activity and that engagement, and it just opens up even more opportunities, not only to be involved, to be engaged, but to learn and to live and to get to know other people and really develop and cherish those relationships as well.
Thank you, Marietta. And it's been really interesting for me through you learning more about the Methodist Church and understanding that tradition of justice and inclusion within the church tradition. That's been very fascinating. Thank you for bringing that with you. Jim, can you share a little bit from your story?
Sure. Well, for some time, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what most people grew up calling Mormons. So the church itself has been active in interfaith effort throughout the world, especially in the last 20 years or so. But since 2013, I served as past president, a board member, and now vice president of the Seal Beach Leisure World Interfaith Council. And so we're working among the elderly population. But in 2014, I was asked to represent the president of the Long Beach East Stake at the 2014 Islamic Shura Council of Southern California Conference in Anaheim. So this was kind of being thrown into the deep end of the interfaith. And it was such a wonderful experience. I reported back to him, and I was soon then received a new calling within the church, which was to work within what we call the Public Affairs Council, and as an interfaith specialist. So that's where I sought out the South Coast Interfaith Council and got involved there as well. So if you're not familiar, Latter-day Saints, we're encouraged to be actively serving in communities and to be an influence for good for social, political, and interfaith efforts. And our overreaching goal is to establish sincere working relationships with leaders of other faiths, to work with them to protect religious liberties and to assist in relieving suffering and improve life and opportunities for the underserved, and work toward positive change to establish and protect the free expression of religious beliefs for all people. So we do a lot of that kind of unnoticed, but over the last 5 to 10 years, that has become more and more an involved program with a variety of different faiths. And so it's really kind of dovetailed into the work that I've done with the council and with the work that I continue to do, both in my community and with those friends that I've developed over the years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Jim. And honestly, your church's interfaith engagement and programming is one of the most robust in the Southern California region. And your community really is a force for goodness and good relations. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to work with you and your community in the last few years. So a couple of us, we started hashing out, because this is such a unique space to be in, right? A lot of us are in civic engagement spaces. We might be in social justice or political spaces. And then we have our traditional faith spaces. But this space where we are bringing together our faith identities with our activism, with our politics, it's pretty, it's full of unanswered questions. There's not a template to follow. It's full of uncertainty. So we were talking about what could we do with this, what are the little nuggets that we could glean from our shared stories that might be of benefit to other people. So just to provide full transparency of this conversation, Jane, Marietta, and myself, we actually thought we'd call, during our conversation, we decided to recruit Jim. So we had this conversation before adding him to the conversation, but we actually sat down together and we just had this brainstorming conversation to figure out what it is that brings us into this space. What are the kind of ideas and values that we all seem to have in common? Because like we've mentioned before, we come from different faith traditions. We did not grow up in the same communities, and yet we have found ourselves to one another. And as Marietta alluded to, we also are now intersecting in many different spaces. Jane and Marietta and I have multiple relationships. We work together in lots of different spaces. So we sat down to figure out, again, what is it that draws us so much to one another and to each other's work? And we kind of found three kind of principles at the core. That's the three we came up with. And the first of that one, I'm going to share them one at a time and then invite one of our guests here to kind of unpack that topic a little bit more. And the first one is the idea of personal accountability. So I'm going to invite Jane to share with us how she understands the idea of personal accountability from a faith perspective, and why this idea may be important or needed in our country today.
Yeah, so I'd like to use a little bit of my faith language in this when I think about personal accountability. And by the way, this is something that I definitely is a challenge for me. It's something that I always need to work on, and it has become more of a focus as I've returned back to church. But the idea of personal accountability is really about discipline, which comes from the word disciple, or disciple comes from the word discipline. So there you go. I have models of how I can behave. And the other word that I think of is sacrifice, which comes, it has the root sacred. So it can be a sacred thing to be a disciple in spreading the gospel of social justice and peace. So, and that calls into question the way I live my personal life in terms of my own personal behavior, but also in the way I hold others around me accountable. And I would also say that in this personal accountability ability or discipleship, I want to hold myself accountable to how I do this work. So how I lead from a position of servanthood and service, and elevate those that are the most vulnerable and follow their lead, and remember that all issues are interconnected, and bring a feeling of peace and nonviolence in my communications with others. So even those with whom I disagree, trying to find common ground. And I just want to give a couple of examples. One is the idea of fair trade. So being very mindful of the way that I spend my money and how others around me spend their money, and trying to create the world I want to see instead of always talking about what I don't like and trying to be against things, build that world. And fair trade, which is where artisans and farmers are given a living wage, and there's no child labor, and there's gender equity and things like that. And it ties together so many issues that are connected in the social justice and peace world, where they're often siloed and segmented. And so that's been a real joy for me. And the other thing is respecting the Sabbath. In other words, resting and making space for the divine and for prayer and things like that. And of course, our Jewish friends do that very well. They also live a kosher, many of them follow kosher practices and things like that. So some of the individual practices that we might, for example, praying 5 times a day, that can only strengthen our commitment to the divine and to justice and peace.
Thank you, Jane. And the word nonviolence, that's really ringing in my ears right now, because I'm thinking about some of the spaces that you and I have worked together in, where there is anger, there is frustration, because those who might be in positions of power or the systems in which we function might be unfair. They've caused us harm, and then you're angry. But when we react to that violence with more violence, is that really effective? there's an organization did a program on nonviolence last year, and I decided to participate in it during the day. And I remember having the thought in my head, but is this really going to work? Like, is it really going to work? And then remembering that quote from Martin Luther King about how only the light can drive out the darkness. It takes a lot of bravery not to respond to violence with violence. So you shared so many good things in there, but I'm going to invite someone else to comment before I take.
So just it brings a lot of strength too. So think of Gandhi, and
I'm going to kick in something, Sarah, because I think Jane has really pointed out a lot of really critical, really essential things in the faith, not only of the Christian tradition, but other traditions that are really similar. I know I'm going to go back to the prophet Micah in the Old Testament that I think we're all familiar with, and talk about personal responsibility when the saying was, "What does the Lord require of you?" And that was to seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So that's gone way back in the early traditions, and then to take it even farther forward to Jesus's teachings in the Christian tradition about looking for the least, the last, the lost, the oppressed, to free the captive, and to all the parables that he had of justice and compassion and humility and relationship. And really the only thing that I remember him being especially angry about or critical about was hypocrisy and self-righteousness. And he talked about looking at the stick in your own eye before you criticize the speck in someone else's. So those are some of the basic things of our faith that keep me going and keep me thinking about social justice and service and inclusion and compassion and mercy. Thank you, Jane.
Marietta, I don't know if you noticed, but you used the word humility twice. And that word humility, we don't hear that word very often anymore, right? We don't, and same with the word servant that Jane brought up. But if you're in service of others, you're in service as a servant, right? And that is a humble with humility. That I really, and as a Muslim, that really resonates with me, because the word Muslim and Islam comes from the idea of submission, submitting yourself, submitting your ego. It comes through, it's rooted in humility, which I think is really important to remember when, like Marietta pointed out, before you call out the other person, holding your own self accountable. Because of course, I have the most influence over myself. The place to start change is with my own self. And like Jane said, those small decisions, which chocolate I purchase. I always bring up chocolate because that's one thing I struggle with. But yeah, my decision of purchasing a chocolate can have a ripple effect on people around the world. And it all connects. Anyone else have anything they want to add to the idea of personal accountability? Okay.
So I could add, hold on, that when you speak about the prophet Micah, he doesn't call me to walk humbly, do justice, walk humbly, and do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with my God. He calls us to do it. So we do this in community. So that's just another dimension.
Yep. There is so much more that could be said about this topic, about beginning with personal accountability. I keep bringing up this book, Crucial Conversations, and it's a book about how to have dialogue across real conflict. And that's one of the points it makes, that you start with your own self first. We only have control over our own language and the way we speak and engage with other people. And from a lot of the other work we've done, one of the things that I find frustrating is we've resorted to a nationwide discourse of a lot of name calling, right? If I disagree with your behavior, I use a really inflammatory term, and the goal is to shame you. But shaming doesn't encourage the other person to try to understand or improve or be better or come back to the table. As a parent, I know shaming certainly doesn't work with children. Shaming doesn't work with adults, but that's the culture that we have fallen into, that's the only tool we have. There are times, I think, when we're holding leadership accountable, where maybe we need to hold people. It's that difference between holding someone accountable and shaming them, right? The second little nugget that we fell upon. Oh, Marietta, I see. Did you want to say something?
No, that's fine. I was going to bring it right back to that meekness and humility too, simply because you and I, Sarah, have shared something about the Beatitudes in the past. Remember, we talked a little bit about it in one of our meetings, and one of the Beatitudes is, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." What a backward thought. How could someone who's humble and meek end up on top or in control or in power of any kind? And it has to do with that attitude of humility and that attitude of inquiry and curiosity, inquisitiveness, and wanting to learn about the other person and about developing a relationship with them because of what you've learned about the common ground that you share. But I know you're going to come back around to that common ground later.
Oh, there's so much to say. I'm thinking about how, the other part of humility is that a person is humble when they're acutely aware of their own shortcomings too, right? Their own vices, what they themselves need to work on. And the more self-aware we are, the more effective we can be in our activism and engagement. So if you're constantly only focused on the villainy of the other, you never actually figure out how to best use the tools and gifts that you've been given. You're only fixated on how to bring down the other person, not how to build up, anyone else. Okay, we could go on for hours, but I want to go on to the second nugget we fell upon in our meanderings. And that's the idea of, is it important or is it significant to believe in something, to have faith in a divine essence, faith in a God, or faith in the human spirit? And how does that faith inspire and drive you? Jim, do you want to
Sure.
jump in on that one?
Yeah, and this really kind of goes to the point that would tie in with our previous point, and that is my faith tradition teaches us that we are all the spiritual children of a Heavenly Father, and we share in His divine nature. Mm-hmm. And so each of us are members of an eternal family. So it doesn't matter what faith group or non-belief that we might have, we are all His children. We are all each other's brothers and sisters, and all entitled to equal opportunity to receive all that He has brought through our faithfulness, and He's given us forgiveness. It's just like you were saying earlier, when we recognize that we are fallible, that we do things that are incorrect, we are humbled enough to be worthy to receive the inspiration that we can. So our belief is obviously that each of us have access to God's will through the Holy Spirit. We are guided. Every person, regardless of whether or not they have a defined faith tradition, have within them that innate ability to receive instruction, to receive promptings, spiritual promptings from a God who cares and loves about them. And so that kind of hope is what we try and share with one another, that, look, you are more than you think you are. You do have capabilities that and potential that isn't tapped yet, and are looking to serve others in ways that will help them identify and access that capability, and even beyond that, rise above the challenges that they have. And we as believers have a responsibility to remove those impediments that keep them from having those types of experiences that would otherwise bless their lives and bring them that kind of peace and hope that they should have. So our outreach for all of us and trying to help those who are considered others, or those who might have come from a difficult background, is important because who we are, we take personal responsibility for not just ourselves, but for the lives of others that might have not had the blessings that the rest of us may have.
Jim, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correct, because this is mind-blowing if I'm understanding you correct. What I heard was that you support and serve other people in order to facilitate, accompany others in discovering the miraculous nature of their own spirit, developing or discovering the magic that they all possess within their being. Is that what am I understanding correct?
Yes, it is. And it goes back to that divine nature that I mentioned. I mean, we have a common spiritual DNA, I guess you could say, with our Heavenly Father. And He has given us so much potential. And we've all come to this earth and tried to get through the challenges that come to us. And many of us have been blessed to live in countries where we have the freedom to do these things. And even within this country, there are many who are kept out from receiving the kind of opportunities and blessings and capabilities that would otherwise make them become a better person and find meaning in their lives. So yes, we all share that same capability, and it's up to us who have these blessings to share them with others so that they can also enjoy their lives and not just have to endure it.
Imagine that if we approached every human being with that attitude. Wow. Marietta, Jane, did either one of you want, I mean, that was a lot.
Powerful.
Yeah. It's reminding me, I started studying the Quran about 4 years ago now. I can't remember, 5 years, something like that. And I came across these passages that had never been lifted up during my Sunday school experiences. But one of them in particular described how God created human beings out of in some places it says earth, dirt, or clay. So something very humble, very ubiquitous, ordinary, humble, right? I think I said that twice now. And then while we are in our mother's womb, that God blows into each of us of the divine spirit. And my mind was blown. I mean, for what it means about me and what it means about each one of you, right? Imagine if every single time we encountered another human being, if we were acutely aware of them being carriers of the divine essence. Each human being, so according to Muslim thought then, each human being is like one refracted ray of the divine essence, right? And so truly, and I think this goes back to some of our Eastern religions, to know God would be to know one another, right? Through each person, we capture yet another glimpse, another spark, another reflection of the divine essence. And if only we could learn to treat each other like that and see that in one another, especially when we really get on each other's nerves or cannot see the humanity in one another anymore. But yes, I think and then I think about, for friends that may not have a faith tradition or may not believe in God, I think, and I hope we can bring someone, an atheist, into one of our conversations, because some great follow-up conversation here. I think people still share that there is something miraculous about the human spirit, right? The combination of our thoughts, the ingenuity, all the possibilities that human beings carry. It's miraculous. Our nature is miraculous, and there's so much hope and possibility there, right? So Jane, Marietta, anyone else want to add before I move on to the next one?
I think really, in a way, Sarah, you've given us the perfect segue to the third nugget, which we talked about being common ground. Because just as Jim described that divine essence within each individual, I think really looking within and seeking that connection to the divine and to the holy within each of us is something that I'm learning we all have in common. I think that's really central to the faith that I've seen in almost everyone that I've met through the Interfaith Council and others too. That my faith tradition shows that that humility and that faith and hope are intertwined, and common ground doesn't really mean abandoning your position or saying, oh, we all believe exactly the same thing. We see everything from the very same perspective. That's not the case. We all are individuals, and we all have been given reason, experience, and experience different traditions, and maybe come at scripture and other things like that from different perspectives and in different ways. And that leads us to maybe go about that journey of seeking in a different way, but it doesn't mean we're not all looking for something very, very similar, and that we can't be helping each other as we go along and as we journey through there and find not just the differences. Differences really enhance things, don't they? What would the world be like if all the flowers were the same color? What would the world be like if all the birds sang the same song? This diversity and this difference is just a part of the beauty of creation, but the commonality is the essence. The commonality is the critical part of what we need to find on our journey to help each other along the way. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Marietta. Jane or Jim, for you both, why is finding common ground important? And how does your faith call you to finding common ground?
Well, I was thinking about common ground and trying to see how we define it. I think we've seen in the last several years this zero-sum thinking erodes the social and political fabric. It negates the notion that common ground is even possible. And so my faith acknowledges that our common spiritual heritage is the starting point for all understanding between people. We needn't be of identical belief systems to share commonality of purpose. And I think if we can get beyond this competitive mindset that's kind of saturated our political and social discourse and realize that our role isn't to dominate one another, but to find a way that we can not only coexist, but work together in giving and providing the blessings of life to everyone that we feel that we might have earned. We all tend to think that I've done it myself, when in fact it's God's grace that blesses us with all the things that we have. And no matter what we do, we can't repay him for what we've received. And we realize that, well, you know what, he's given us enough that everyone can benefit. And finding a common ground to work with others and throwing off this feeling that I've got to overcome someone else to be in a position of authority or power really is a way that we need to realize that, look, we can no longer look at this as a zero-sum condition.
Some people really feel that when we look for common ground, we're selling out our values. How do you guys see that? Do you have to compromise on who you are a little bit to work with others?
I think the first thing we have to do is throw out these incorrect notions that we know it all or that we have all the answers. And frankly, once we can share common ground is when we certainly start to discover, as each of us have, and we've worked with others of other faith or those of no faith, I'm just amazed at the amount of faith and obedience they can have to a standard of living that I'm not familiar with at all. And I realize there's good out there and everybody has it. And if we can open up and share that and take it into our lives and say, good heavens, I've never even looked at it this way before, that's where we reach common ground. We're not giving up anything. We're just sharing infinite space that God provides us to know and love one another.
But let's not make it sound too easy, because it definitely is not. It's something that it takes, actually, I think it takes a set of skills that have to be developed. And I will say that's one thing that I've found really, really helpful and really inspirational in my work with Braver Angels, because that's part of their purpose, is to help people see the possibility of doing just as you've described, Jim, in finding the common ground and in listening to someone who disagrees with you, who sees things from a very different perspective, but still being respectful and having civil discourse and actually learning from that other person, and learning not only what you share in common, but maybe different ways of looking at things, different nuances that you might not have thought of, different ways of approaching things. And so you need those skills, those practice opportunities. And I think whatever organization or whatever means and method we can find to develop those and to attempt to engage with people who seem to be very, very different from us, it can only make the world a better place. That's one reason why I think it's so helpful to have people who've devoted their time and energy to developing these things and sharing them with each other.
I'm still finding our conversation today, and every conversation is so different. Today, I'm finding us constantly kind of anchoring ourselves in that idea of humility. Jim was describing that, and then you also to develop the skills to intentionally take the time, we have to first be humble enough to acknowledge that there's something there we need to work on. Jane's internet is unstable, but she messaged me that she wants to add something. Jane, are you able to speak?
Yeah. So I thank you so much for Marietta for calling us to actually become educated in how we can speak to each other and find common ground. And I just want to give an example of that. So I coach people on creation care in our national church all around the country. And of course, Lutherans have lots of different views about, different weather conditions and what the reasoning and all of that. But we all believe in creation care. God calls us, and most religions do believe in us stewarding God's creation. And so some of the ideas, first of all, I just want to name that we do have more in common than we think. And that there are people that benefit from having us be divided. So just having an awareness of that is very important, right? We don't have to put that out there as item number one, but just knowing that that's the case, so it's not going to be as hard as we think to find common ground if we talk from a place of personal experience and personal hopes and dreams of what we'd like. Because there is lots of commonality. We all want to be safe, and we all want to be able to enjoy God's beautiful creation, and we want our children to be able to have opportunity and things like that. So it's very important when you're trying to connect to someone to find out what they care about, and then talk about the issue in those terms, right? So in other words, treating them with dignity and compassion and interest, curiosity. So
that also requires really knowing yourself and what drives you, like being able to keep your ultimate goal in mind, because what happens is people get fixated on making the other side lose or winning themselves versus their initial goal might have been something different, right? Like, and if we're going to get divided on just verbiage, I like what you've lifted up here, that your church, you seem to have taken the time to find language that would bring people together to get the same task done, but perhaps remove that, whatever negative feelings certain words might carry for groups of people. But I wanted to share a story with you guys. So a few years ago, I started developing a relationship with Rabbi Rebecca at Temple Menorah. And we were initially brought into communication because she was putting together an interfaith women's panel on the story of Moses for Passover. And so we were going to sit down and look at scripture from the Quran and the Old Testament together and retell the stories from the perspective of the women. So we were also doing something, we were really going out of the box here, right? We got to look at the scripture from fresh eyes. And we came together side by side, we came to this, we were comparing our stories, the way the story of a prophet might be told in the Jewish tradition, in the Christian tradition, and the Muslim tradition. And we started off in our early engagement focusing more on the commonalities that both of us held, right? It turns out we went to the same college, we graduated in the same year, we got married around the same time, and we have kids nearly the same ages. So our initial relationship was built on, at the end of the day, we kind of are worried about the same things, our kids being healthy, our kids being happy, right? Once that relationship, once we saw each other as fellow human beings, as sisters, people that we deeply cared about, then we kind of had that relationship confidence to kind of go into, okay, why is the story told this way in your tradition? Why is it still told this way in my tradition? And we came up with this idea, where we landed was, and it's this humility piece. I wasn't there during Prophet Moses's life. I wasn't there for Jesus's life or Muhammad's life, none of them. We're all relying on he said, she said, he said, she said. The he, she could be God, of course, and through scripture, but we're all just using our very best reasoning and understanding and judgment to find nearness to God. But it's all really guesswork, right? And so we started talking about how maybe the differences in the way two traditions tell a story tell us more about the time and context in which revelation arrived, right? The Jewish community was dealing with a certain social political context. So maybe the story of a prophet was understood in a certain way. And then you fast forward several thousands of years and you get to the Muslim community. And when the Quran is being revealed to Prophet Muhammad in the 6th century in Arabia, so a very different social political context, maybe those differences became a point of real interest for us because we realized that the differences in the way the same story was being told us something about the stories of our people and what they were experiencing at that time. So point being, if you can build that relationship muscle first, really love one another as fellow human beings, the possibilities are, and then for anyone that's wondering, we do have very difficult conversations at times. We do talk about really protracted conflicts on earth. It doesn't mean we've solved anything, but we're able to have genuine conversations. And I want to come back to, again, this Crucial Conversations book. I can't recommend it enough. I wish I had the book right next to me. There's a great line in there that says that when you're in conflict with someone, whether you're having a political conversation, an interfaith discussion, or a debate with your husband or wife or partner or whatever, humanizing the other person, it's not because you want to excuse them for something they may or may not have done, but when we humanize the other person, we don't villainize them, it brings down your own emotional temperature, right? When you work yourself up, using language and posture that puts all blame on the other, and we all do the same thing, right? When we talk about our own community, we lift up the best parts of ourselves. But when we talk about the other, we emphasize the worst parts in the other, right? But if we take that time to humanize the other person, it brings down the temperature in our own hearts so that we're able to be more present in the conversation and engage more productively. So again, that book, I just love that book.
And follow up to what you were saying, Sarah, I think, love is the only starting point from which we can begin to accept those with whom we disagree, or whose lifestyle we may feel is not acceptable. Our responsibility as believers is to acknowledge our spiritual siblings, those who we are spiritually related to, which is everyone, and who are as worthy of God's love as we are. And I think that's kind of what happens. And I think often we're thrown into situations. I was in the LGBTQ effort. Here I was dropped into a whole community that I was not familiar with. And suddenly I had to drop preconceived ideas and beliefs that I had and realized that, holy cow, these are people who are dealing with a very difficult topic or a difficult lifestyle over which they really had no control. And once you're dropped into that new experience, you suddenly are forced to do just what you were saying, recognizing that I really need to get better at listening, active listening, in sharing feelings, and not just letting someone talk, but actually feel what they're saying. And in these kinds of experiences, even if it's an argument, if we can not take offense at what they may say and listen to what they're saying, often we can take, especially in the political areas, we can take what they say and not react and immediately say, all right, what is it that I'm missing here? Why can't I understand the way that they feel? And the point is, it doesn't matter so much what solution we come up with, as long as we've opened that to dialogue, so that they can then, like you were saying, calm things down, bring it down to a level that you're suddenly sharing deeper feelings rather than just reactions. Then we can be better examples to them and they to us on how we should be approaching the differences that we're trying to solve.
And that's such a big and important point, that it might not be the solution, the mechanics of the solution that matters most, but it's how people feel and whether they feel included and related to. That's what really matters most of all, right?
Right.
Right relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you want to define that a little bit more, Jane?
I guess I know it when I feel it, right? And I know when I'm not.
What does it feel like?
Well, it feels like it feels like I'm loved and the other person is loved.
Mm. And does it necessarily matter if you're falling on the same side of a conflict?
No.
It doesn't, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and Sarah, one of the main questions that we had tonight was how does a person of faith approach a situation where there's division and there are conflicting ideas and so forth. And I think really when you get down to the essence of almost every faith that I've encountered, that idea of love is central. I remember there's a passage where someone asked Jesus, what is the most important of the commandments? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the rest flow from that. So he really defined that as being central to the whole idea. And then also in a letter that was written to the Corinthians, he said, though I may speak with bravest fire and have the words to all inspire, but not speak from love within, it doesn't mean anything. So I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it's just saying that all your actions, all your all your wisdom, all your efforts, if they don't come from a spirit of love, and as we've been saying, spirit of humility, then they really can't be effective. So if we as people of faith, approach a conflict or a difficult situation from that spirit of love, it really influences how we engage with each other and what the outcome will be.
I would say that we are slowly forgetting how to love. I think we have fallen into the habit of conditioning our love. We can only love someone if they're a reflection of ourselves, if they live the way we live, if they believe the way we believe. But if we look in any of the stories, whatever scripture, whatever tradition you're looking at, the examples that are lifted up accentuate the fact these prophets are sages. They were brave in their love, and they loved without limit and without distinguishing between themselves and the other, right? So, okay, I've been married for 17 years, and marriage is not easy. I think some of you have been, Jim, I think you've been married a long time too, so you know how difficult it is. We've all experienced some degree of marriage. So my husband and I were exploring, how to improve things, and we're reading this book, and this concept really applies. It was, and I had never thought about it before. The idea of enmeshment. Is this something familiar to you guys? Okay, so enmeshment is when a person's sense of self is tied to the other person, you're enmeshed. So if you and your spouse, and it's not just for spousal relationships, actually it's more common, it's also talked about in the parent-child relationship as well. So I can only be happy if you're happy. So if you do something I disagree with, that's a catastrophic problem. Now, anyone that's been married knows you can't possibly ever agree on everything, right? It's just not possible. So the idea is that enmeshment creates the situation where you cannot be intimate or close to people that are not duplicates or replications of your own self. And so in fact, your own sense of self ends up also insecure, because you're constantly looking for affirmation from the other person. They have to reflect back your lifestyle, your choices, your beliefs, and your values. Otherwise, you fall apart. On the other,
I was just going to say, Sarah, and then follow up to what Marietta was saying earlier. We understand what Jesus said, but I think what he did was even more important. He associated with those who were considered dirty or unworthy, people who were frowned upon by society, rejected, even put to, made their lives difficult by the powers that be. But he did it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's where, when we're talking about it, either it's political or social, when we look at those, like you were saying, who we feel that we're competing against, that we're trying to dominate, those are the signs that we're doing it wrong. The point is we can't really come to love people that we don't know. And if we were great, we could love them first and then get to know them. But it really takes us making that step, going into unusual places, meeting people who are entirely different, and then saying, geez, I wasn't aware. Why wasn't I? And the point is, we come out different. And so, just being around those we're familiar with or comfortable with doesn't push us to grow at all. And we really have to look beyond our point of view and our comfort zone and see what we can do about being, as Jesus was, among those that others had rejected, and find ways of including them and raising their happiness to a level of ours by acknowledging that, look, I'm not worthy of what I've got, but I'm willing to share it with you too.
The problem is, so if you are used to an enmeshment style relationship, you cannot be close to people who have a different lifestyle than you, who are further away from yourself, because your own sense of self is so fragile.
Sure.
So what this methodology talks about is that individuals that are, it's called individuating, but having a greater sense of self means that you are able to be intimate and proximate to people that can be grossly and dramatically different than yourself, and you don't fall apart. And in fact, you only discover more about your own self in close relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah, Milia is a great example of this. I don't think she's been able to join today. Milia is, the word devout has taken on a lot of negative connotations now, but she is someone who practices her faith very deeply, very meaningfully in everything that she does. It's hard to be around Milia and not somehow pick up on her Muslimness. And yet she is, she jokes about how before the pandemic, she said, I spend more time in churches than I spend in mosques. I'm in synagogues and churches and temples more often than I'm in mosques. And it only adds to her expression of faith. Jane, were you going to say something?
Well, I guess one thing when you were saying the individuation is, I think that can come from knowing that you are loved by God, right? So, and I just wanted to also bring up prayer. So it's really important, Jesus' actions, but also prayer does help me to pray for my, enemies or the people I disagree with or whatever. And it does help me to love them.
And what does prayer do, right? What do we do? And maybe we can touch just first. I think most of us, when we pray, we kind of check out for me anyway, it's checking out from the hubbub of all the noise in my life, right? All the demands, all the actions, and to really sit with myself, right? And see if I can, if you have a relationship with God, it can mean looking within to seek that connection with God, or it can just be a reflective time. But you're right, prayer is just so important. So I'm going to call you guys each to kind of offer a closing thought, and then I'll share my own as well. But, and I think Marietta kind of took us in this direction too, asking that question about how does our faith shape or animate our activism? A lot of activism today is framed as dismantling or preserving, right? And both emanate from a place of fear. And again, not villainizing fear. Fear is natural and needed. And certain systems, behaviors, and institutions need to be dismantled or preserved. But every one of you has mentioned in some way that when you organize and lead as a person of faith and conscience, you think, plan, and act from a place of love in the hopes to build something. Is there something in closing that you would like to share as it relates to love and organizing and leading from a place of love when it's really difficult, because it can be difficult?
So I guess I'll talk just, I'll give an invitation to anyone that listens to us. If you're someone that feels very connected to your religion, but feels like you are not out in the world actually doing the things that you think might create a better world, I invite you to occupy those spaces because it's such a rewarding life and it really does deepen my faith. And so I hope that the same would happen to you. And there's so many different opportunities at this time because there are so many things that we can build and that we can also try and prevent. And the second thing I'd like to say, if you're already out and about doing work for social justice and peace, I would invite you to continue to root your organizing in faith and in peace, and take the time and the I'll just close with that. But it is a wonderful life to do that, to be out in the world organizing from a place of faith. And I just invite you to shop at 10,000 Villages, to join the Justice and Peace Committee, to, wherever you see your place, go for it. This world needs you.
Oh, I love the plug. I love the plug.
It's interesting. I have always been impressed with all the things that Jane does. And I don't know where she gets the time or the energy to do it. I know I can't anymore. The reason I chose to retire is because I was just getting so burned out by my work. I was old enough and I thought, I've got to get away from this. It's just eating me alive. But one thing that's interesting, and you were talking about prayer, is that on Facebook, I had joined a group a few years ago. And it was an interfaith group, but they had specific things that they were asking for. But the theme of it has become prayer. And so people who are facing difficult times will post up there, I've got a daughter who's got cancer. She's going in for this treatment. I need your prayers. Or my father has been stricken with COVID. I need your prayers. And the difficulty with that is you read it each day and I think, my goodness, there's 1,000 prayers here. How am I going to cover all this? But I found that if we are praying always, we can know that that is impacting the lives of others. Because if God answers prayers, and he does, our prayers on their behalf, however quickly, however often we have to give them, are still going to work. And so one of the things you do discover, if you are constantly praying for others, as you see people having difficulties, obviously we can't help everyone, but we can pray for everyone. But if we can see them, find their names, find their difficulties, and pray on their behalf, many times I'll say, Lord, I don't have enough time today to name all of these people, but these are the things that really are touching me. Please bless these people. And each day we can feel that we're doing something for somebody, not only that we don't know, but we don't know the full story, but our faith in his ability to bless them is there. And so that is something simple that we can all do, even if we're tied up with all the different things that we're asked to do or trying to do, and feel that we've accomplished something, even if we haven't got the time.
Wow, thank you, Jim. And I'm thinking about how another side effect of praying for others is that it makes you acutely aware of the struggles around you. It reminds you that other people are going through a lot, and maybe redraws your focus from dwelling on your own issues and own struggles, which can be paralyzing at times, and shifts you into someone who's able to be a friend and an ally to do something. So thank you for that.
Exactly.
Mariette?
I'll build on that directly too, because sometimes when you are aware of all the burdens that people carry, it can seem so overwhelming. But our pastor told me once that when he looks out across the congregation and knows some of the struggles and some of the challenges and some of the heartaches that exist there, it's not that's not where it stops. What he also sees is the grace, the compassion, and the courage of those individuals and of the community together. So I just like to leave us with those two thoughts, that yes, the world is a tough place and it's full of all kinds of challenges. And we need to have the courage to face them. But we also need to be open to looking at the grace that we see and the compassion and the courage of other folks, and to look for, I'll follow up with what Jane said, look for not just a cause that you're passionate about, but a community that you can be a part of and engage with, because it enriches us, it enriches the world, and it helps us achieve much more of God's plan.
That's beautiful. It gives us the opportunity to experience the miraculousness of our fellow human beings. I'm going to offer, before we do our SCIC pitch, which we are due to do, it's 8:07 right now. I'm just going to offer my closing thought on love. A lot of the work that I engage in beyond the interfaith space is around social justice and equity work. And one of the things that concerns me is there's a lot of trauma out there, right? There are a lot of people who have been dealt the short stick. The systems in place harm them disproportionately. They're constantly the ones that are left out in the cold, and they're in pain. And then I see a lot of people move into political spaces to build something new, right? The systems that maybe don't work for them, and so they want to do something new. So they change the people. There's different arguments that are being made, but that trauma is being carried into these spaces too. And those methods, the methods of engagement don't change. So a lot of the times you find the same tactics and the same methodology being applied in these alternative spaces that were supposed to redress the harms that are being done in the primary systemic spaces. And it's just like constant trauma being responded to with more trauma, more harm being responded to with more harm, right? That whole an eye for an eye, and we're all left eyeless, and we still haven't addressed what the real issue is. Why did that person lose an eye, right? And so for me as a Muslim, if I really remember that God has blown into each human being of the divine spirit, I don't really have a choice, right? How could I not love a being that carries of God's spirit, right? I'm called to love the other, even when it seems most difficult. And in those moments, it's where I learn the most about myself. Why is it? Like, those moments where you're like, God, this person's really hard to love. I'm really having a hard time right now loving this person. Why am I having such a hard time? I learned the most about myself in those moments. And I hope better learned how to actualize the most miraculous or the better parts of myself in those moments. But I want to thank Jane, Marietta, and Jim so much for being here with us today. This is a crazy week for us. We are going live 3 times a day. Really, we cannot thank Cheryl and Milia enough for all the amount of work they're putting in, creating flyers for each program, making sure that the speakers and participants are lined up, having the Zoom room set up. So thank you to Cheryl and Milia for all of that work that you're doing. I hope that you guys all take next week off. That's my prayer for you right now. I want to invite all of our SCIC community, our allies and beyond to join us throughout the week. Tomorrow is day 2 of our Long Beach Gives program. We will have so every day we have 3 programs. The morning programs at 9 a.m. and the theme is some sort of meditative practice. And then at noon for the next 2 days, we have cooking sessions. And we have in the evening at the 7 o'clock time slot, we have some sort of music. Except on Thursday, we have one of our signature SCIC programs, Religion 101, which Jim Greer actually used to be the chair of that program before he left it. And he left it in the very able hands of James Light, who's just done a wonderful job shepherding that program. So tomorrow, if you're able to join us at 9 a.m., we have a Muslim woman who will be leading us in a recitation from the Quran and sharing how that is something that brings her peace. That's at 9 a.m. You can join us at 12 noon. We're going to have lunch with one of our past presidents, Dr. Rainey Ghosh from the Southern California Hindu community. She is going to be sharing one of her personal family recipes, and myself, and Pastor Reverend Steve from Pacific Unitarian Church will be trying to be helpful to her as she cooks, but we'll see how helpful we are. And then at 7 p.m., we have a really exciting program that's being chaired by Dr. Tony Lee of the Baha'i community of Manhattan Beach. It is called the SCIC Spoken Word, Visions of a Hopeful Future. So there'll be poems, there'll be spoken word from individuals from all sorts of faith traditions and practices. If you're interested in participating, there's 3 ways to participate. You can join on Facebook or YouTube Live. Thanks to Cheryl, we now have that capability. So you can find us there at those 3 time slots, 9, 12, or 7. Or you can also participate in the Zoom room itself by clicking on the flyer and RSVPing for the program. Then you get to enter the room, and we're going to go ahead and let our guests, now I see we have a couple people in the room to just chit chat with us for a little bit. And if you are able, it's been a tough year. Honestly, Marietta and I both sit on the executive committee of the South Coast Interfaith Council, and it's been difficult reinventing ourselves through the pandemic. What we do is a lot of community building, relationship developing, and that's hard to do when you cannot meet in person. But our communities have been so generous, and it's been so inspiring to see the people clicking and making donations. So if you're able to today, please consider donating and supporting this work. If you found some benefit in tonight's program, or you're inspired by something else during the week, I invite you to, again, it's the link to donate is on that flyer, which we'll repost to our Facebook page. Cheryl, am I forgetting something really? I don't know what we would do without Cheryl. She keeps our heads on straight. Am I forgetting anything?
Nope, you did a great job. Thank you. It was a wonderful program.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Monik and Ronald. Ron, did you want to unmute and say hello and share any thoughts you might have? And Jane, Marietta, and Jim, if you guys need to log off now, you are more than welcome to do so. You guys have been very generous with your time.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Marietta.
Thank you all. This was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you all. You guys are just,
Hi, Ron and Monique.
you guys both you all bring in so much into the conversation. Maybe
Thank you, Cheryl.
Maybe they've stepped away from their computers.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much. Have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you all later in the week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.